Okay, we are calling this meeting to order and asking Pamela Schilling for a roll call, please.
Okie dokie. Gary Tenenbaum. I pick on the one guy that's not sitting here right now. Bill Infante.
Here?
Katie Schwer. Here. Jennifer Ripple. Present. Ryan Slack.
Here.
Jackie Whitsitt.
Here.
I know Gary is present, and I know
Is indeed.
Auden is present. I think they'll be
Yes.
in presently.
We'd like to thank our videographer from Grassroots for filming tonight. That would be Natalie, and it's grassroots.org if you want to see it. Tomorrow is the mayor's coffee at 8 o'clock at Starbucks. And you're welcome to come and talk to me and ask questions or whatever. And tonight we have a special large group of guests, which is Bennett Bramson's class, the CMC Legal Environment of Business Bachelor's Course. And in order to stay in the room, you have to answer a question. And it's not, what is your favorite color? The question is, are you going to vote? All right. Okay, then, I have these great handouts that we had a nonprofit come to the library the other night and just give us the short and sweet on the state ballot initiatives, because they are complex. The blue book, if you have it, is that fat. This is the simple version, so I want to save a few for the council.
Okay. Another day, another dollar.
Yep. So anyway, welcome, folks. Thank you for coming. Okay, we have a consent agenda that is rather huge, and it's got the minutes on it and several resolutions regarding ballot issues. And what I'm going to ask is that the way this is set up now is a given outcome. If there's anybody on council who would like to pull one off because they oppose the way it's currently written, please tell me so we can do that. Otherwise, we will never get to the budget hearing. Okay, is there a motion?
Mayor, I move that the town council approve the consent agenda items as presented.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Our next item is our call to the public, where we ask that people who are out there in the audience who would like to make a comment on an issue that is not on the agenda, that they be able to come up and do that. It's a 3-minute deal. Just identify yourself. You just would want to be courteous and constructive. Is there anybody in the public that would like to come up to the microphone and make a comment about anything that's not on the agenda? Please. Bennett, you didn't coach these guys to ask a question. Okay. Mayor and council reports and comments. I'll go while Auden is chewing. Okay. One thing that I wanted to share is that the Lake Christine fire is 100% contained. So just as promised, when it got wet and cold, the fire would completely go out, and it has completely gone out, or is 100% contained. I'm not sure that means the same thing, but it does to me. So, anybody else? Oh, Auden is still chewing. God.
No, I'm good to go.
Okay.
So, on the CDC parcel question, I would like to propose to council that we try to figure out a different process. And the process I'd propose would be to have the applicant, suggest that the applicant withdraw the application, and then that we have a public roundtable conversation where we can weigh in, they can understand what we're suggesting, and we can either come to some kind of consensus or not, but at least move it forward that way. And I'd love for us to discuss that, consider moving it forward, because right now, as I described at the last meeting, I just feel like the process is keeping us from being able to communicate what council wants or doesn't. And therefore, the process gets dragged out forever, and we never get anything. Everyone's frustrated, and nothing happens, and it just seems unfair.
I don't disagree with that idea. I mean, I think that we are just doing it the same way, getting the same results so far for 2 or 3 years. But I don't think we've got time on the agenda plus to discuss that. Plus, we didn't give a heads up to folks who might have wanted to come in and hear.
I'm saying let's do that.
Okay, let's do that. Let's put it on the agenda and do that. And if anybody has thoughts about that you would want to give Ryan a call, Ryan is the interface to our applicants, so that's also a great idea.
Madam Mayor,
Thank you. Yes, sir.
we would have to obviously have a conversation with the applicant, and if the applicant is unwilling, they have a right to due process, and so we would have to see that process out. One of the things that staff had considered was doing a work session with the applicant present, possibly at the next meeting, where you could talk more about the application as presented and vet some ideas and hopefully come to some consensus on what works in the application, what doesn't. I think at the last meeting, we heard a lot of information sort of individually, but I don't know that there was, sort of a consensus at the end of that discussion. So we'll have to, I can certainly talk to the applicant. He's out of town this week, so I wouldn't be able to converse with him.
Jackie?
Yes.
I thought there were legal barriers to that. Help me understand that, because
Sure.
that's
Well,
fine too.
as far as doing a work session, that would essentially allow council to have a discussion. You would have to have discussion essentially on the merits of the application. You'd have to stay within bounds of what has been presented to you. But you could also discuss, I think there's some components of the plan that I've heard you all talk about that make sense. And there's some components of the plans that you didn't think made as much sense. So we could aim to align those among the group so that the applicant would have an idea of how to, massage the application to have perhaps something that's more agreeable, but with staying within, essentially the same land area, probably the same, context, makeup of uses, things along those lines, so.
Yeah, so, I mean, the best way for a discussion to occur, not in the context of a public hearing, would be for the applicant to withdraw the application, so that way there's not a specific development application in front of you, and then having a work session or multiple work sessions where there could be that more of a roundtable community feedback-oriented dialogue would be possible, as opposed to being more stuck in the development proceeding in a public hearing type process.
Well, let me just ask a clarifying question. If the application stays in, are we not allowed to have just a work session? Does every conversation we have to be a public hearing from the moment it's submitted?
Well,
Could be public, though, public works.
it'd be an open, I mean, all work
there's a-
sessions and public meetings are open meetings, so they need to be
Right,
there.
but
I guess
I'm-
I'd want to think through that and talk with staff a little bit more
Yeah.
about how that would look, just to ensure that there's opportunities for public participation. There aren't any issues with, council's decision-making process on a actual development application.
Well, let's talk more about those anybody who has ideas about clarifying this or getting something else on the table, call Ryan, because we are now having a conversation that people probably would have wanted to hear. Anybody else have a,
Yeah,
council? Yes.
because I guess I like Auden's idea, frankly, of taking the time to be able to evaluate in a manner that does not create legal jeopardy for us. But I would also add that, in addition, we had previously talked at the last council meeting about two different kinds of inputs that we were hopefully going to recruit from an independent expert urban planner. One was going to be shared, cost-sharing arrangement with the current project proponent, and the other was to inform the master plan. And so I'd suggest that it makes an awful lot of sense, if we are now tipping into this master planning process, to take the step back and to use that process to guide what might ultimately be conceived for the parcel. But I guess I'll use that as my segue too, into asking, if we can put a time constraint or set some time boundaries around the preparation of the master plan. I know P&Z discussed it. I'm enthusiastic that they are moving forward, but is there a timeline that we can establish to release the RFP for the consultant who will come in as the urban planner and for the completion of the master plan?
So I got the feeling, tell me if I'm wrong, that staff is going to noodle this around a little bit and come back to us with what we can and cannot do with the applicant, as an applicant.
And the applicant has to weigh in.
Right,
Yes,
exactly. That's right, exactly.
that's correct.
Okay. Okay, our next item, yeah. Oh, Jen, sorry.
I would like to thank all of our partners regarding the Roaring Fork Apartments water disaster, and Pitkin County, just everyone stepping up, and the owner Rhonda coming out here immediately. That just showed heart and soul.
Yep, amen to that.
An addendum on the master plan thing, and it's the strategy, which is a precursor to that. I'm thrilled that you, Ryan, and staff are addressing kind of elements of the strategy, looking to move this forward. I'd also like to see if we could perhaps set a deadline for the completion of a strategy, because that then is effectively the basis upon which the master plan is conceived. It is the basis upon which we will budget funds for 2019 and beyond. And I'd also like to suggest that our strategy be well coordinated with interested constituencies like the Basalt Chamber, but also with Eagle County, Pitkin County, and then other jurisdictions whom we might caucus with to define their objectives. And I guess by way of an announcement, I understand there is a meeting on the 11th, which is a congregation that's addressing the survey findings of some research on affordable housing and the demand for affordable housing in the valley. So I would think that that's going to be incredibly relevant to what we decide in our own strategy for affordable housing, for daycare, for all other element of social good that we may want to consider. And so I want to encourage greater coordination with a lot of the other jurisdictions as we prepare our strategy and as we prepare the master plan.
Thanks, Bill.
Really quickly, if I can just reply to a couple of those. So I had put in my Friday report, I'm sort of jumping ahead into my manager's report a little bit, but we have been, I basically took back the strategic framework that we had talked about at our retreat, and I've been working on that. I gave a draft to staff. We went through about half of it, not this last Monday, but the prior Monday, and then this Friday we'll be completing that. So I really wanted to get staff's input just to help develop it a little bit further. I thought their input would be valuable, and so the idea would be then to get it back to you all, still in draft form, of course, to review, and we could have a conversation about it at a work session or something along those lines. And then as it relates to the master plan, just on timing with that, I went back and I watched the last week's discussion on that, just so I made sure that we were following the direction received by council. And essentially what I had heard was the idea that the Planning Commission would come back to you all and have a couple different options. Pricing options were one of those, so having like 3 different pricing options, and then also an outline that you all could discuss. And I spoke with Susan today because they did talk about it at the last meeting, and we're thinking that we'd be able to bring that back realistically to this group at the beginning of November. So that would be the idea. And then staff is going to start working on sort of an outline that that would kind of help Planning Commission's efforts advance in a quicker way. So,
Well, if you want to go ahead with the rest of your manager's report, it's up.
Okay, cool. Just a couple other quick things. You may have seen our crews out over the last couple days doing odd things in the parks, but they're blowing out the sprinkler system, so we've got mist going in funny places, people walking on sidewalks, and all of a sudden starts misting next to them. So this is the time of year that we're doing that. That's a pretty big effort for them, so it'll take a little bit, but they're making some progress on it. The second thing, briefly, Jen touched on it, Roaring Fork Apartments. So as of Friday evening, we have the second through fourth floors back in there. They do have round-the-clock security still to keep the first floor secure, but they are working, trying to mitigate all of those apartments. They had to rip up flooring, take down drywall, and so I think that's progressing pretty well. But so we still have a few displaced people, but they've been able to find some temporary housing. I know Aspen, our SKICO helped out with some of their temporary housing that's not filled right now, to help bridge the gap for those folks. But we're hoping in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to get the full floor back in. And kudos to Rhonda, who's the owner of the building, that really jumped on it, and we were able to hold a public meeting, which I think really allayed some of the fears from the folks that live in those buildings of, you know, what's going on, what can we expect. And so I saw, along with Chief, that was a successful meeting, so wanted to mention that. And then the final thing.
Could I just interrupt and just say, and besides kudos to Rhonda, the staff, the police department, the first responders, as always, were there instantly and making people feel safe, like always.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final thing, so Auden, I got you a bumper sticker. I finally opened the box for the tiny library. I've got, you can pass that down to Auden.
Actually, I think we should put it on his car before we leave.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I'll put it on.
Yeah, that's what I figured.
So the art base is actually, they're going to paint it for us. I think I got one of their after-school classes, and so they took it over. So we already have the post set, so we'll get that out into the linear park would be the location for that. So it should be a pretty neat addition over there. So with that, that's all I have for now.
And I just want to say a quick backstory about Auden. He came in here early on and wanted to do these tiny libraries because they're a great idea. Put little libraries out in the community. You've probably seen them. They're just a box with books and you can take them. And to his credit, we ignored him for about 10 different times that he brought it up, and then finally we didn't ignore him anymore. And so that is a lesson in life. You're not going to get it through the first time, no matter who you are or what you say.
And I just add that I want 3. So we're still,
all right,
but
all right.
that's
We've got
awesome.
another 10
Thank you.
meetings to go before we get
Right.
Exactly. Okay, is that it, Brian?
I do have one more quick thing.
Oh,
I had to give, you'll probably all notice that Jen is up on the screen this
Yep.
evening. She had been asking me for a screensaver, just so we don't have all the files up there of our Basalt logo. So as you can see, the logo is up there. I followed through and complied with that, but
I move that we keep
I had to
it
rib
like
her
that
a little bit
forever.
on
Is there a
that.
second?
I know, I think we should
All in
all take
favor?
turns.
Aye.
I motion that we all take turns having our photo presented.
Thank you, thank you.
No second.
Okay, our first council item is public hearing for renewal of a recreational marijuana license, and that was probably Pam.
Heck, I was not prepared. Yes, please.
Yeah, just come on up to the,
So this evening, we have a guest representative. Would you like to introduce yourself for the council?
My name is Brittany Pino. I manage the Roots RX recreational dispensaries across the state.
hi Brittany.
You can
Have a
sit
chair.
there. Okay, thank you. And so this evening, she is representing Roots RX over here on Southside Drive, and Robert Holmes, and the sole owner. And as you can see from the memo, staff has gone out to the investigating agencies. There are no serious concerns of any kind with the renewal of this application. Unless you want me to go into detail on each one, but I think this is a public hearing, so if any public has any comments, we could continue this public hearing until the next meeting if we need to. Okay,
Otherwise, we can open the public hearing.
thank you, Pam. Thank you for coming in. So this is a public hearing, and we will open the hearing at 6:20. Is there anyone in the public that wants to make a comment regarding this renewal for this marijuana shop? Hearing none, we'll close the public hearing. Go to council for questions or motions.
Mayor, I move that the town council approve the renewal of recreation marijuana license for RFS CB LLC DBA Roots RX, located at 165 Southside Drive, Basalt, as per the staff recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okey-doke. Thank you. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you, Brittany, for coming in. Appreciate it.
Next item is first reading of ordinance 17, an ordinance of the town amending Chapter 2, Article 9, Victims and Witnesses Assistance Law Enforcement Board, and Section 2-139-5, imposition of court costs, providing for the disbursement of funds received through said surcharge of the Basalt Municipal Code. Chief Greg Knott.
And Ann Stevens.
And Ann Stevens. Thank you.
Ann is the chair of the Vail Board, so I asked her to come with us so you can meet her and also have, if you have any questions. So what we're looking at is a revision to the Vail ordinance. So in 2001, the Vail ordinance was passed, created the Vail Fund, created the Vail Board to assist victims and witnesses. Over the years, it had had limited usage, and when I was appointed police chief, it finally got the time to really look at this and get a Vail Board up and running. So we now have a new Vail Board. We have 2 council members. We have Ann, we have Will Fisher, and myself that sit on the Vail Board. And what the board did is we started looking at the ordinance in ways that we could better serve victims and witnesses in the town. There's some changes in the ordinance that we're requesting that specifically are geared towards victims and witnesses. Like, you'll see that previously 35% of the money in the fund was to be used to help victims and witnesses. The board has changed that to 90%. The board made the recommendation that you don't have to have a summons issued or a ticket issued to municipal court to be eligible for funds. That was a requirement before. So if the police department didn't catch somebody, they weren't able to access these funds if needed. So that's been changed. We've added a section where donations to the police department will be going into the Vail Fund under a different line item than the surcharges that are currently there, which provides oversight. So during the fire and after the fire, the police department was donated $31,050. And this is a great place, I believe, for this to go, so that it has oversight, so that the Vail Board can, look at requests and then report back to you as to what these funds are being used for. Also, on the victim witness side, those requests come to the board, and then the board evaluates, makes the determination if an award is made through application. So those are pretty much the main changes to the ordinance itself that the Vail Board had examined and looked at. Do you have anything?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, except that I've been asked several times by several people who is eligible. And just so you're aware, these are just for municipal offenses or very minor criminal activity. There are state funds available for people that are victims or witnesses that need help from any kind of more serious crimes, i.e. that go into county or district court. So these are for municipal offenses only. So very minor crimes, but it's good to see that it's finally being utilized after having sat stagnant for so long.
And I just want to throw in, we also clarified that this is publicly kind of advertised so people know that it's out there to submit requests for those funds. And lastly, just to thank these 2 in particular, because this fund, the whole paperwork around it was a little bit of a mess, in my opinion, and it took a lot of laundering to clean it up and make it so that it was really clear, so that the people coming after all of us will kind of get what this is supposed to be for. So, anybody have questions on that?
Well, I was just gonna say also that they've created, or you guys have created, a really good resource, both in English and Spanish, to be able to give out to people to be able to utilize this, because I don't think anyone really understands, like, if you call it Vale, it's like, Vale, we live in Aspen, we don't live in Vale. But, you know, you're a victim of anything, you know, in the town, and you qualify for this, and people should be able to come in and ask, and we're trying to engage the Latino community too, so they have access to this.
Yeah, and Chief Knott is practically entirely responsible for that great brochure that, and Dina, of course. Dina with the translation for the Spanish. So that will be given out to every victim of a crime, whether or not, as Chief Knott said, anyone is apprehended for the crime or not.
Great. Okay, thank you so much again. If there's no more questions, is there a motion?
Mayor, I move that the town council approve ordinance number 17, series of 2018 on first reading and set the public hearing and second reading for October 23rd, 2018.
Second. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thanks, guys.
Nice.
Have a good night.
Me too.
Okay, these next two, can I talk about those together?
Yes.
Okay, so items 6C and 6D, one is Resolution 16, a resolution of the town authorizing the engagement of professional services to design park improvements. And 6D is Resolution 17, a resolution of the town authorizing the engagement of engineering services for Two Rivers Road and Basalt River Park. Brian Mahoney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is an item, both of these items have been before you before, and so we're putting them back on now to give you a little bit of history. Basically, back in the spring, staff issued an RFP both for landscape architecture services as well as engineering services. Both of those were centered around the river park as well as Two Rivers Road. The idea behind issuing those is sort of twofold. We have our capital improvements plan that identifies spending some money over in the river park, the existing land that we own already. And then we also knew that the application for the development piece of the CDC was coming forward. And so the idea was that as that moved through the process, council would be able to have some professionals on board to look at the design and understand contextually what that development would look like in relation to the park or vice versa. And if we are to spend money on the river park, more improvements in the capital improvement plan, that we understand how that would relate to the CDC property. So in other words, we didn't want to start putting improvements in there, shade structures, play structures, what have you, only to find out later on that a development proposal might not complement sort of where those are located, and then, you know, have to remove something that we've spent money on. So the idea was really also that this is a conceptual plan. So they're not engineered drawings ready for construction. So it really kind of places some of the different elements in the parks so that we can begin thinking about this in sort of a bigger context. And so that's really it. Staff, since the initial introduction of this to council, has rethought a bit, and what our recommendation is that both of these services be approved, but that we would not move forward with them until we come back to council and get, you know, a go-ahead. That right now might not be while we're in the middle of budget now, and then we're in the middle of the development application. You know, I got the sense that there was some trepidation about sort of presupposing an outcome on the development application. So one of the things that staff would like to avoid is having to go through the RFP process again, because that's a pretty lengthy process. We feel like we vetted that well and got some really good consultants on board to help us, because inevitably we will be doing improvements on the river park. And right now we expect that these services combined would be about $50,000 total. And so Keeping in mind that we already have a park there, and eventually we're going to need to accommodate some more parking out along the frontage over here. And it would probably follow a similar design to what we've already seen down in front of RMI and the new River Center. But we feel that if we could get them on and just hit the pause button, we have talked to the consultants about that, and they were fine with that notion as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, if I could just kick off, Ryan and I have talked about this a lot because there has been pushback from council, as well as I have had a couple of citizens even approach me that they didn't like this idea. But I feel like part of this, a great majority of this, something's going to happen. And my dread is that we're not going to do anything. We're going to put ourselves out a year farther on working on the park and working on the road improvements if we don't do this at least. And I'm convinced that this does not really necessarily tie us to any kind of final design. It's conceptual, my understanding. So I would like to support staff and their suggestion that we at least move this far on it, but I would definitely want to hear where other council members are on this at this point in time. Anybody raise your hand? Auden?
Sure. I don't quite get why we do this in the absence of a development that we knew we were designing around. And I don't understand why we approve it and then say, but we'll pause. I'm open to that, but why would we do that? Couldn't we at a subsequent meeting approve it and proceed? Or you just want to get this bureaucracy behind us so that if and when we're ready to pull the trigger on design, we can? Is that it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the RFP, that process is pretty lengthy. We want to make sure that we are ready to go when we can move forward. I think that hitting the pause button, the idea there is that it would allow sort of the previous discussion, your suggestion of where's this application going. It allows us to kind of get our feet under us as far as that goes. But you know, the fact remains that staff was basically following existing policy that presumed a purchase of a portion of the land over there on the CDC property, approximately an acre. But to add that to the already 3 acres plus that we own. So regardless, if we buy the acre this year or whenever, we still have a 3.2 acre parcel, approximately, if I'm getting that wrong, correct me, but that is hungry for improvements, shade structures, play structures, what have you. And then as well, the parking that would go along with it on Two Rivers Road to be able to accommodate some events and, you know, things like that. So that's really the idea. We were trying to get out ahead of it initially back in the spring and be coincident with the process that the developer was following, so that you all had an idea, because the goal was ultimately to create vibrancy over there, that if they had you know, a restaurant on the edge, well, is it just going to be dirt from there on out? No, obviously. So we want to know what kind of things we might be able to add in the public realm that really help to complement that and meet our goal of creating you know, a destination place on that corner.
Councilor Tannenbaum.
Well, and I've been thinking about this, and I look at it more, this is, the way staff has presented it more is, this is an on-call services type of contract, because you're not asking for any services until we need it. And if we want to do, you know, withdraw this application, if they go forward with that, I see this as a way to have somebody ready to go, at least on the park improvement side and the road improvement side. And yeah, we can discuss how we do the urban improvements, and maybe that's another RFP that goes out. But this, to me, is kind of, I don't want to move forward but I'd like to approve the contract and have them ready to go, because I looked at it, I've worked with both, and they're very, very good consultants, and I think if you went through an RFP, you'd get the same result, if they would even want to submit again, because it takes a while to submit and do it. So I look at this as on-call. I like the way the staff has presented it, and if we start moving forward with some of the ways that we've been talking about, we're going to want somebody on board to help us design the elements that are more than just the park.
Jen?
I'm on board for approving both of them. First of all, that it is a show that the town of Basalt is earnest and interested in working with a developer to develop the parcels and ensure that the town is involved in what is important to us. And so by choosing the landscape architect and the engineering services who are already familiar with our process, et cetera, that is a sign of goodwill and that we're ready.
Katie?
Quick question.
Mhm.
Are there any implications if we, for some unknown reason, unforeseen reason, need to break this obligation, contract, engagement?
No, I mean, if they don't provide services to us, then we won't owe them anything.
I just
So,
want to make sure
yeah,
that there's nothing in the
services.
contract that if you don't move forward within 6 to 12 months, you've had us on the hook, you owe us a retainer or something like that.
No, we wouldn't, and we've reached out to the at least Connect One.
Both of them.
Oh, Sopris as well, and kind of let them know what we were presenting to you, so it didn't seem to be an issue to them.
Great.
And are you looking up just to make sure that what I said is correct?
Well, we have our standard contract about, terminating services. Obviously,
Yeah.
we don't pay if they're not providing the service.
Yeah, so no retainer, anything like that. Right. Okay.
Mr. Infante?
Yeah, I tend to think that if you sign a contract, or at least in federal government, once you sign a contract, you have to have funds obligated. If you don't have funds obligated, you are known as what is called anti-deficient, meaning you're spending money you don't have. So, to the extent that we are no closer to realizing a final solution on the parcel than we were a month or a year or 3 years ago, and since we are proposing now to step back, if these funds have to be appropriated and therefore cannot be spent on another purpose, $50,000 is a lot of money that in a period of budget tightness, I don't think is responsible to lock up for the purpose of a contract that may ultimately be unnecessary. And putting these contracts before the larger design effort that we are again going to cost share, presumably with this developer, suggests to me that we may be paying twice for the same service, or we may have paid for one that we will never need. And at that juncture, it starts to sound like we're tipping into the boundaries or across the boundaries of waste. We have the responsibility to protect the fiduciary interest of the taxpayer. And if we are not doing that, if we are spending money preemptively for a service that we may never need, then I do not think that's a good idea at all. And since the RFP has already been drafted, it is unlikely to change. Canceling the tender and retendering when and as needed in a year or two or sometime later is the course that I would recommend.
Anybody else? Do you have any other answers or comments yourself?
No, I mean, I think it's a bit different than perhaps, and, Jeff might be able to weigh in. But as far as us having to, encumber the funds or that it would somehow obligate us, I think that was what we were trying to explain, that, both of the consultants have been, we've spoken with them. They're long-term sort of partners with the town. They've done a lot of work, and so I don't think we're going to run into that kind of situation. But it does allow us to be a little more nimble when we're ready, and it seems that even as it relates to the park part that we already own, it would be good, you know, we could certainly move forward on that sooner than 2-3 years out, because we're identifying some of that, should you all agree, for money to be spent in the river park as part of the capital improvements plan. So I would think that we would move forward with some kind of elements and construction in there. Whether it's on the acre that the CDC owns remains to be seen, but we do own some of the other land, so.
Okay, if there's no more comments, questions, is there a motion?
Maybe, did you
Oh,
want
I'm
to just
sorry.
weigh
Yeah,
in
I
on
was
the
just gonna-
contract part?
Sure, I was just going to say that, as this has been presented, it's to authorize the engagement, but not necessarily any specific work. The contract calls for that work not to begin until directly authorized by the town manager. There's the ability to terminate the contract. So there is that flexibility there. As Ryan mentioned, there is a need or a potential need for some work unrelated to the CDC parcel, but there's also some work the consultants may need to do that might help the town in conjunction with any land use application for the CDC parcel. So did that answer questions?
Did you have something else, Jen?
I have something else, that I myself am very aware of waste, and I do not feel that this ties up funds. These funds have been accounted for in post in the CIP for multiple years. It's part of park design, and that is a line item within post. And that's my understanding of where.
Yeah, Bill.
So I
If
guess
not-
let me ask, if there is an interest in cost-sharing a future design effort with the developer, are we suggesting that we will spend twice for what could be the same activity?
I would say no. The designer, the consultant that we had talked about cost sharing with is really a land use planner, and a land use planner is different than a park planner. There's a different discipline and a different approach to what they're doing, and there could certainly be some crossover, but usually you're not going to have those people doing the same type of thing. And
So I guess
I
I'm
think that
just
was my.
Speculating on the scenario where we may have a land use planner that conceives a completely different parking plan, which then forces us to re-examine the plan that could be produced by the engineer, for instance. Or they could conceive of a very different combination of assets on a parcel that may conflict with what the landscape designers propose.
And that's why timing on this would be everything. So if we're not, we could, since we come back to you all before we actually green light any work to be done, that, a planner could be engaged and kind of give some of that information and work in conjunction with these folks, because, the developer's not going to be interested in cost sharing on, the park part that is already owned by the town, for example. And so I think that.
But so do I understand correctly then that you would execute the contract, but before dispersing funds, you would seek council's approval again? That seems redundant to me. What I heard Jeff say was that the town manager would have executive authority to release funds when, in your opinion, you believe the time is right. So once town council votes, the contract is executed, and in your discretion, you will obligate and spend funds when you believe it is correct. So town council's role is over as of tonight, if we vote for this.
And Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think what Ryan said was the contract is set up such that the contractor won't do any work until Ryan says so. But Ryan has said he's not going to direct that work until he comes back to council with direction from council as to what work should be done.
That's the verbiage in the resolution, so it does allow, another check-in with you all before moving with that.
Gary?
I'm okay with it, and I'd like to make a motion to approve. Should I do separate?
Can we do these,
Jeff, or-
can we
Yeah,
do
yeah,
these together, or?
I would just do them separately.
Okay.
Okay. Approve resolution number 16, series of 2018, authorizing the engagement of professional services to design park improvements with the staff recommendation to delay until we do another check-in? Is that what you, okay,
That's in there, I think, right?
okay.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion?
Yeah, I hear your concerns, but I don't think we're actually taking the action, so I'm going to support it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to
Thank you.
approve resolution number 17, authorizing engagement of engineering services for Two Rivers Road and Basalt River Park, and all those things are in the resolution, correct? Perfect.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
There's going to be one opposed?
Pardon me? Oh, I'm sorry, opposed. Right, gotcha. Okay, thanks, staff, council.
Sure.
We have some presentations this evening, short ones, I think. The first one is the elections update from the Pitkin County Clerk, Janice Voss-Caudell, and the Eagle County Clerk, Regina O'Brien. Come on down.
Both clerks?
At the same time. We're a team. They're gonna talk over each other, I think, or something like.
Regina, Janice.
Okay.
All right. It's a rare moment to have.
No, thank you for the opportunity. What we'd like to do is review with you the logistics of the upcoming elections and then answer any question that you may have. And you always have good questions. 5 minutes. So important is to know, obviously, that Basalt split between Eagle and Pitkin. So we have a little bit different logistics to share with you. Sample ballots. It's a long ballot this year. There are 13 measures at the state level, which include issues and questions. Pitkin County has 13 measures as well, and Eagle always has more. So it's a long ballot. Go online and review the sample ballot. Go to pitkinvotes.com or
eaglecounty.us/clerk. Our sample ballots are there as well. And a cool new tool that the Secretary of State's office has launched. If you go to the Secretary of State's website and you find the tool, you can actually enter in your county, your street address, a little bit of information, and it will pull up your specific sample ballot. So, for example, on the Eagle County website, we have the composite ballot listing every question or race that could be on the ballot, but if you actually go to the Secretary of State's website and enter in that little bit of information, you can see what your ballot looks like, and I tested it out. It worked really well.
Can you just say that website real quick?
So the Secretary of State's is, and I apologize, I don't have the specific link to it, but if you Google Colorado Secretary of State, and then I believe they'll have a drop down there for, I think it's called View My Ballot. You can get there. You can also, I did tweet out the link to it specifically. It's a pretty long one. So if you go to the Eagle County Clerk Twitter page, the handle is @ECClerk. The last tweet that was out there has the link to it, and you can go directly there.
Thank you.
ditto. The other thing I want to let you know is last week Friday, both Pitkin County and Eagle did drop the Tabor notice, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. So any issue that has a financial impact, both state, well, I'll go to that, at local level, look for that in the mail. Also, the Blue Book was dropped a couple weeks ago. In our offices, we have supplies. If you want one, stop by, pick it up. And the Women's League has a great resource. So if you go to our websites, we have the resources linked to our websites, the Tabor Notice, the Blue Book, and Women's League as well. So for more information, if you didn't get something in the mail. The other thing we want to let you know is Monday, ballots drop, the 15th. So 22 days before the election by law, between 22 and 18 days before the election's ballot drop. If you do not receive your ballot in the mail by the middle or the end of next week, for both Pitkin County and Eagle, go online.
eaglecounty.us/clerk.
Or the Secretary of State's site, or Pitkin County Votes. Go in your registration system and review your record. Where did you tell us to send your ballot? That's where we sent it. You may want to update your record. We will void the first ballot and reissue your mail ballot. So look for your ballot in the mail next week. So for Tabor Notice, look for your ballot next week in the mail. Drop boxes. We have a drop box when you receive your ballot, right out on the street outside this building. Joint Pitkin County and Eagle County, drop box for Basalt area. I'm going to talk about the drop boxes up, Valley, and I'll have, Regina will talk about drop boxes down. If you're traveling and you work in Aspen, there's a drop box in Snowmass right outside the town hall, and we have a drop box, and we're now back in the Pickens Administration Building. It's right on the street, on Main Street, outside our office.
And then we obviously have the shared drop box here. We have the 24-hour drop box outside of the Eagle County Community Center. And then again, if you're traveling up in the eastern part of Eagle County, we have the drop box outside of the main Eagle office at 500 Broadway in Eagle. And then we have one at our Avon office as well. Those are the external drop boxes. When we do open for voter service and polling centers, which we will open on October 22nd, our clerk's offices will be open. They'll have replacement ballots for any ballot that an Eagle County voter would need. And also, if you happen to be traveling closer towards Election Day along the I-70 corridor, we open a Vail Voter Service and Polling Center at top of the Lions Head parking structure. We will have any ballot style that you need there, and that's going to be open the Friday, Saturday, Monday before Election Day, and then from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on Election Day. So if your work or fun travels take you somewhere else in Eagle County, we're happy to serve you and issue ballots at those locations as well.
So use the drop boxes 24/7. They have surveillance. Stop in our offices as we indicate. We can serve you anyway. Registration, pick up a ballot, drop off a ballot. The other thing I want to do is, before I move into early voting, when that is, I want to encourage everybody to vote your ballot. 85% of people know a month ahead of time pretty much how they're going to vote their ballot. It's a long ballot. We only have X amount of resources and X amount of space to process mail ballots. So return them early. There's a couple of good reasons why you should. You know probably how you're going to vote it already a month ahead. 2 is get those electioneering calls off your list. Your vote, when it comes in, you can go into your record with the state and see when your ballot was sent, when it was received, and when we accept it. When it's received, your name's taken off those electioneering lists.
The
Okay?
phone calls will
Great.
stop.
The phone calls will stop. 2, your ballot will be counted. We're processing them before the election, 2 weeks before the election we start. At 7 o'clock, the first thing we do is download the outcomes, and we upload them to the state system. So have your ballot in the first returns on election night, all right? 3, I mentioned resources. We will not work until after noon, 12 at night. We will stop, and we will continue the next day. The papers love to have the stories, the outcomes in the paper by midnight. Those are usually our goals. We can't expand our resources, we can't bring more people in, and we can't process your ballots if you drop them all off at the last minute. So I encourage everybody to vote your ballot and return it early. Now, if you don't get your ballot in the mail and you want to go to early voting, that starts the 22nd of this month. Regina mentioned her early voting just at Crown Mountain.
Yep.
Ours is in Aspen at our new Pickens County facility. Early voting is Monday through Friday, also on Saturdays, usually 10 to 2.
We're 9 to 1.
Okay. And then the Monday before election day. So don't stand in line, early vote. And then on election day, let's review what's open, the service centers that are open for you. 7 to 7 election day. Pickens County has 3 service centers open: Aspen, Pickens Facility, Snowmass Village Town Hall, and Emma Church. Okay.
We have all of our 4, again, the 3 clerks' offices in Eagle County, Avon, Eagle, and Elgibel, and then our Vail Voter Service and Polling Center are all open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And since I'm saying 7 p.m., it's really important to reiterate that postmarks do not count. Ballots need to be in to the ballot box at 7 p.m. on election night. By law, we must close those ballot boxes at 7 o'clock. So another reason to make sure your ballot gets
The
in.
drop box outside gets closed at 7. All drop boxes as well. Okay.
Not 7:01, but 7 on the dot.
Right, exactly. We get it. So to reiterate, what we've got is your ballot's coming out next week. Look for it. Most people know how they're going to vote a month in advance. Get it back to us so we can process it, so you're in the first returns on election night. If you didn't get your ballot, come vote early. Okay? Don't stand in line on election day. Come vote early.
And just to reiterate, if you have any questions at all, you can contact our offices, and we're happy to help look up voter registrations or answer any specific questions.
Or if your citizens ask you a question, give us a call. happy to help you.
Okay, does anybody have a dying question?
Thank you so much for all your information. And finally, how many stamps are required on a ballot?
We're talking two stamps, two stamps. The ballot is, we have, and I'm sure Janice does too, we have a two-card ballot, meaning that it is, the first card is a long sheet, ours goes to 17 inches, front, back, and then the second card has questions on the front. So it's a pretty thick, big ballot, but two stamps.
So if someone accidentally mails their ballot in with one stamp, then they need to come in and.
We don't advertise, but we'll
We
take
cover.
care of it.
Okay.
It's on TV now, you guys.
Yeah, I know.
I know.
But yeah,
It's always been this way.
If there's insufficient postage, we have, we work with the post offices and we will make sure that we cover those costs.
Thank you for clarifying that. I have had that panicked moment myself.
Thank you
Use
for.
the Dropbox, save your stamps.
I wish that
Yeah,
it
really.
said on the envelope, just an idea, that this requires two stamps.
We put it in our voter instructions, because we produce our ballot envelopes before we know how heavy the ballot is gonna be, whether we're gonna be a one-card or a two-card ballot. So that's, if we could provide that information.
There's also regulations at state level that we comply
Yeah,
with,
yeah.
so.
But we do
Okay.
put it in our instructions and on the website.
Pardon? Yeah.
You might have said this, but if you work in Eagle and you're up in Pekin and you drop the ballot there, will it be processed?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you drop it, we've had voters, like say, there was snow and you were stuck in Denver. If you had your ballot and you dropped it in the Denver County ballot box, then the counties work together and we get, as long as it's dropped off by the 7 PM on election night, the other county will get the ballot and it will be processed.
So we'll clarify, where you live determines who is responsible for the registration. I, Picken County, Clerk of Eagle, Eagle County. We count Picken County ballots only, Eagle County counts. But if you happen to drop it in the wrong drop box because you're in the wrong county, we have processes and agreements where we forward that ballot.
Hey, one quick thing.
Yeah, sure.
All you young people in the audience, I don't know if you can vote if you're 18, but millennials are the lowest voting group of any voter bloc in the country. You're equal in size to baby boomers. You could determine the direction of the country, but your peers aren't voting. So whatever you can do to push that out will empower you.
If you want to register, look up your registration, the state website, govotecolorado.com is a wonderful resource. And then you can also, again, come into any one of our offices, fill out the voter registration form. We can get you registered.
What's the latest that you can register?
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
What's the latest that you can register and still vote?
Up until and on election day. So.
Up until like
And
6:58?
Up until and on election day. The requirement is, if you're under 18, you can still register. You can text it in at to vote and put in CO to vote, and you can register online if you're under 18. Now, you won't receive a ballot in the mail because you're underage.
Pre-registration, if you're 16, you can pre-register, and then automatically when you turn 18, you hit that threshold, you will
Great.
become an active voter.
So if any of you are turning 18 within the next week, we'll send you a ballot in the mail and you can vote it.
Excellent.
So CO to vote, text, go online and register.
They got it. They got it. There's some of them are actually going like this. Anyway, I just want to say special kudos to clerks this time of year. You earn your entire year's salary when you have these big elections. I know I've seen you guys under the gun and Pam under the gun, so we thank you. And you coordinate the volunteers on election day and all that stuff.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I'm sure you're in the same situation. If anyone wants to be an election judge, we are still looking for election judges. We're 50% down. So we're still working to find judges, train them, and get them in positions. We'll be sending an all-county email out tomorrow. Are you ready to do the same too?
We can always use more judges, yes.
Well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for your time.
We have one backed up behind you, but this was really, really good, and I think you had actual live audience.
Okay, thank you. I want to mention one more thing is, we went through a statewide motor vehicle conversion August 6th. I want to thank the community for their patience, for their understanding, and helping us work through that. Any conversion has new opportunities, and it takes a while with the training curve, et cetera. So we are we are experiencing, it's a much better system, more information is needed. It is taking longer, but I want to thank our community for their patience. They're great to work with. Thank you.
How old do you have to be an election judge?
16, you can be a student election judge with parental permission and, yeah.
He's got somebody in mind, I can tell.
Yep, we've been trying to get a couple student election judges in, especially on election day. You know, it can be difficult with the schedule that we need, but especially on election day, we need more hands in the county room and things like that to help process ballots. So get
That's
those
a great
results
idea.
out.
If you know I'm pitching for Picken. If you know someone that wants to be, go online, pickinvotes.com, judges, you'll see an application. Fill out the application form. We ask for your skill sets, and then we'll open up slots for you.
Okay, if anybody else has questions, I would ask that you would contact the clerks directly. Thank you very much,
Thank you for your
ladies.
time. Thank you.
Be careful driving home.
Thank you.
Both of you.
Thanks, Regina. Thank you, Janice.
Okay, Roaring Fork Conservancy presentation. Ryan and Susan and Rick. Hi, Rick.
How is everybody?
We're having a blast.
Big, fully seated council here. Thanks for having me this evening. Brian
Do
or
you guys
Susan,
want to
would you-
introduce this? Because I see your names on here.
There are, yeah, sure, we can give a brief, but I think Rick's pretty well prepared to talk about the proposal, but a month or two ago, we were approached by one of the board members at...
Correction, she's just a donor. She doesn't sit on my board.
Oh, she doesn't on the board, okay, excuse me.
Just a donor.
Just a
Maybe I
donor.
like that. Just-
Anyway, somebody who's involved with the River Center and had proposed an idea for a walk to throughout town with some informational signage that would describe the history of our water and sort of the physical traits of our water, whether in wetlands or rivers or what have you, and some of the sources. So I'll let Rick kind of dive into the details of what the proposal was. But we suggested, the reason he's here tonight is that because we had this proposal and we don't have a specific policy developed around donations yet, that we thought, bring it to council, get some basic direction from you all. Staff does have a recommendation in the staff report, but I think it would be good to hear from Rick, and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.
Go ahead.
So the thought and the concept was really developed, I think, independently of what Post has already looked at in terms of a sign program in Old Pond Park. And what this supporter is interested in is a continuation of the look and the theme of the historical signs throughout Basalt, with the sections of the railroad and the text and the historic images on that, in a looping trail that would go through Old Pond Park up to 5 or 7 signs that would tell an historical account of water, either sort of in the west or particularly water in the valley. I think a sign near the River Center would also talk about the history of that site. If you're not remembering, the River Center is constructed on a reclaimed brownfield site, so it's kind of a great success story to take something that had originally some railroad operations and then some operations that maybe weren't the best prescription for the river, to actually clean that site up, redevelop the River Center on it, and have what has been created there today with the park land and all the surrounding beauty. So it has, there's a nice opportunity to tell a story there. You get the idea for the concept if you've seen the historical signs, but again, there would be more information perhaps on, one of the stations might detail the history of Rudai Reservoir, maybe tell the local legend of the Frying Pan River and how it got its name, and just some of the sort of the classic big picture water-related things that I think that have helped define the West and certainly helped define Basalt, and would give people a little better understanding of the picture, the history, and really, to a degree, what we're facing today, or hopefully they would then terminate in the River Center and learn more about water and watershed issues. You guys have, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, you have a wonderful donor who has gone way out of her way to bring this to us and to you. In reading the memo and talking to Ryan, it does seem like we could give some general direction, but it does look like a great one for Post to talk to you about first, maybe, because there may be some redundancy or some ideas that have already been laid out there for how this might work. But I would want to give the council, if they have any special direction other than working with Post on this first. Jen?
I'm very grateful for the opportunity, and as well, I am respectful for the work of staff and previous committees, and in 2015, and previous councils. In 2015, a previous council approved a sign ordinance, and I would invite there to be a conglomeration or a mixture, a synthesis of the 2015, and to meet with the vision of a private donor, and to marry the two of them together and give that direction to Post.
Anybody else?
I
Yeah.
would just love to salute the great work you guys are doing at the Roaring Fork Conservancy, and to the extent that our riverfront currently is absent any kind of signage, any kind of interpretive materials, anything that helps educate the public, tourists, anyone, about the river ecosystem, about our community, about our history, I think is wonderful and should be embraced. And I agree with Jen, though, it should be coordinated with whatever the guidance has been.
So did you want a motion on this? It doesn't really look like it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, looking at this, I mean, we get a lot of donation requests, and I just want to be clear that the town directs, with the help of the Conservancy, of how these signs are designed and implemented, because, it's great to get those donations. We get a lot of them, and it's great, but it really has to be Post and staff and the Conservancy to develop something that's not crazy sign pollution out there, but tells a story. And I just worry about how much signs we could put out there, because I know there was a 2015, I didn't really love the signs in that one because they're too basic, and I'm hoping that these will be more informative on really what, how the town developed with its water and rivers, but also kind of a Western, trying to educate people, but really trying to direct it back to your river center, because I thought that's where you guys are trying to really tell the bigger story. So, but I'm definitely supportive of sending it back to Post.
Is that a motion?
Sure. I make a motion that, that we work with the Roaring Fork Conservancy and this donor, and that we, move to bring that back to Post to work with staff in the Conservancy on the development of an interpretive sign plan for Old Pine Park.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Thank you for coming down, Rick.
Thanks.
Okay, it's the star of the show at this point in time. It's the 2019 initial budget discussion by Ryan Mahoney and Christy Hemrick, our new budget director
Madam
and
Mayor?
finance director.
I just wanted to point out that we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule.
I would say 1.25.
You doubted me.
It's
You doubted me,
1.25.
but
So I get another minute and a half on budget conversation? Is that what you guys
That's
are telling me?
Christy.
If you start, you get it.
Okay, so start with the scenery, right? Okay, we're gonna start with the scenery. So, you guys have just taken the trek up Mount Soperus. We are looking at the 11,950-foot view of our budget, okay? And we're looking down on the town, down the valley. And so, the good news and the bad news is that we just met the statutory deadline this time, okay? We were tight, but we did it, just because a lot of the transition within the finance department and that kind of thing. But the good news for you guys is we're not expecting you to have read this document, and we don't anticipate that you know any of it, which is really great, because we get to really focus on the Mount Soperus view of budgeting and make sure that we're starting to educate council and educate the community on the important parts of our budget, so we know the big picture before we delve into the small details, okay?
Makes
So
sense.
that is the greatest hope for tonight, is that we are on the top of that mountain, looking down at this beautiful valley, and, you know, started with a rainbow. So, thanks to Robbie, she gave me that picture. So I'm gonna go through this. The first thing I wanna note, in accordance with some of the feedback we got in our audit too, is just the importance of the organizational structure that we have out there, and that the citizens are first in our budgeting process, and the council's first in our budgeting process. And there's lots of other people that have been responsible for the start of this budget process, but we just want to make sure that we put right in the forefront of this document the importance of our citizens in the review process in our council. So, okay, so that's why that is first. So then if you go to page II in the document, okay, you'll note that I always have a table of contents when you've got a big document, because otherwise, how the heck are you supposed to know what the heck is in the, there is too much stuff in here, okay? So just so you guys know, just briefly what the start of this document is gonna look like is a budget calendar. We're gonna just briefly go through what we plan on doing this year.
Christy, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Is this available to project for the people in the audience?
It is, but it is challenging because it's in an Excel document.
Okay.
So I can do that if you would like me to.
I mean, it's okay if you weren't planning or prepared to do
I was
that.
thinking about it, I have it here, but it's hard to, I don't know. If you want me to, I can.
No, don't switch around now, but maybe at the next public
Yes.
meeting, we could have that so that the people in the audience could see what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I'm more than happy, because like I said, I uploaded it. And
No
then I was
worries.
like, well, with this Excel document, it's kind of still a little bit, whatever. But with this, the second presentation, I was gonna put it up on the.
Perfect.
It seems like it's a little bit better fit for that screen, the way that it's just kind of ugly in that.
Sounds good.
Okay. So anyway, so we'll start with the budget calendar and fund balance conversation. Lots of information on the general fund and bond fund, water fund, and conservation trust fund. So we've got different things we're going to be talking about tonight. So the first thing I wanted to note is we talked about transition time, and so I started on the 13th of August was my first day here, and so we started on the budget process really the first day I was here, and really started getting department heads thinking about their budget and that kind of thing, and really have been working and compiling that ever since. It's been a little bit of a tight timeline and tight turnaround this time, but we got there. And the other thing I'm going to note is that we've been a little behind in the finance office because of some of the transition. So just note that we're going to continue to research and dig into different revenue sources and different things and get better and better, but we think that this is a really good starting point for our budget process. We feel really good about it. Okay? And it just gives you an idea of what we're looking at going through, because now that we've met our statutory deadline for the 15th of October is actually the case, then we've got really through the November 27th for our second review, and then December 11th is our final approval of the budget. So we've got a lot of time to really have conversation with council and talk through a lot of the questions that you guys really need to have those conversations about. So that's why it's really great to start at the 11,950 foot view and then start delving into what council really wants to see and what direction the town wants to go, okay? And so that's how we've really worked this whole thing, and that's the whole plan going forward. So I'm gonna go to page 3. Yeah. Now, so maybe, if you want, I can kind of go over here, if that's okay.
You need
I'll-
a mic.
Oh, can I talk over there or no? Okay, I can.
But you,
That's in the budget for that microphone, if you remember.
All righty, I am stuck to the microphone right now. Oh. Yeah, go to the fund balance one, click on that. There you go. Perfect. Okay, yeah, and then. Well-
easier if you can sit here.
Oh,
It's easier.
okay. Nah. Here we go. Okay, oh, that's awesome. Check that thing out. Okay, so the first place to start, when you're really starting to educate people on where we're at is your fund balance, okay? Fund balance, just so everybody understands that in the public, community, and the council, is really your assets minus your liabilities of the organization. And we have funds because we are a town. And so we have different resources based upon if it's like for bond repayments or for the general fund or for our water fund. And each one of those are considered, I guess you could say, a different company, okay? But each one has its own set of fund balance. And so that's the health of the organization, is really how much monies you have available in what's called unrestricted funding. Okay, especially within your general fund, because that's where most of your operations lie, okay? And all of your recurring costs, most of your salaries for all the services you provide to your community. So when you look at your general fund, you're starting here at the 2017. You have pretty much 3 different types of fund balance that are really important. The first one is your restricted. That's restricted by ordinance, grant, or ballot. If it's ballot language, it's, been approved by the voters for this particular use, that kind of a thing. Like, for example, Post is a great example. The cigarette tax is another example of that. So you look at the fund balance of how much we have carried over from the end of 2017 is $3,613,000, okay? That's the available amount that we have. And I want to note that I added back a negative restricted amount that was in our audit, because we don't want to unrestrict any balance mistakenly. So that just is really reflective of all of our restrictions that we have as of 12/31 of 2017. Then we have what's called a TABOR, Taxpayers Bill of Right restriction. And what that really is for any sort of emergency, and that's our minimum fund balance requirement. That's something that we're required to do by state statute. And then you have the really fun area, which is the best area to kind of play in, is your unrestricted fund. And that's where you get to really dream big and go, okay, well, what do we want to do as a town? Okay, these funds are not restricted by any sort of a ordinance or a ballot or anything, a grant or anything. And those are potentially available funds, although we have general fund balance ordinances in play that require that we hold a certain amount of cash, because that's prudent financial management to do that, okay? And we do have that cash available. So those 3 funding types are really important to understand. So the total general fund fund balance is $7.4 million roughly. And we're projecting for 2018, $8.6 million, which is awesome. I mean, so you look at your restricted is going up, almost $1 million. And that's because we're not spending all the post funding this year. We have plans for that for the future. That's a lot of that. And then your unrestricted is looking at going up at this point too. And this is subject to change, because this is just based upon estimations of all the department heads at this particular moment in time. So, but at this point, we're looking pretty good for this year. Okay. So then you go into, well, gee, where am I at compared to what our fund balance requirement is in our fund balance policy? So currently, the fund balance policy states that you should be having 33% of your general fund revenues in restriction, okay, unrestricted amount, unrestricted general fund revenues. And so that turns into this $2.4 million. So what we have available after looking at our fund balance policy is this $841,000. You think, well, that's the good news. That's great that we're meeting our policy and we have a little bit extra available funding. Well, yes, and not necessarily, because you have this other little piece out there because of Taxpayers Bill of Right, which is our line of credit. Okay, and so this is the estimation of the amount that we're looking at having to kind of make sure we set aside somewhere, because that's a line of credit. What the council was anticipating to do with that line of credit is to pay it back over time. However, because of Tabor, it says that we have to take it out of our budget each and every year. So it shows up as a deficit on every single one of our budgets until we pay the gosh darn thing off. So that's the difference between, you know, state statute, Tabor, and really paying this off like a mortgage. And so it's a challenge there, and Tabor is very difficult, if not impossible, to interpret. But in looking at that, I would at least definitely tell you that we have to consider that when we're looking at our fund balance, that we still have that outstanding, and that's after a payment of $150,000 that we put in our first draft budget. So then you're looking at 808 in the hole. So we're this is just something we'll need to talk about over time, is how to handle that. Because I think that really looking at our line of credit really does restrict or limit us a little bit in how we can use our unrestricted fund balance. There's no question around that, okay? So if you scroll down, so that's kind of the general fund picture. So you go down to our other funds, our bond fund down here. So as of, if you guys remember, our fund balance and our bond fund was a negative fund balance. So that means that it was, that we were actually borrowing from our general fund to pay some of our bonds. But we're getting ourselves out of that this year. It looks like we're gonna be a little bit to the good on our fund balance, and then into 2019 we're gonna be even a little better. So it's not like we're trying to make money in that fund, but we definitely don't want to lose money either. We want to make sure we're paying our bonds back and we're not having to borrow any funding from anywhere else. Okay, and that's what we're able to do. Our water fund. This is our water fund from the 2017 audit, okay? So really there's three parts of that, and the water fund, if you guys know, is what's called an enterprise fund. So it's run just like a business. It's an accrual-based fund, okay? So you have your depreciation in there, you have stuff like that. But anyway, so you have, but then there's three different types in there. So you have your capital assets, net of related debt, reserved amount, and then an unrestricted amount of $206,000, which is available funding within that. So you're still really tight in your water fund, but you're still doing okay. And looking into depreciation, which is a really good measure of how much you should be spending on capital, it's about $267,000 a year. So we're looking at spending 175. We're at least within the range of okay on that. So then the last fund you guys have is the Conservation Trust Fund, okay? And that fund is going to be showing an estimated fund balance of $200,000, and that's the lottery funding, and that's fully restricted. Okay. So any questions on your fund balance, where your fund balances are at, or does it make sense to you guys? Okay. So, and I think that's a really important one. So then you get into buckets, okay? So if you go onto the 50,000 foot view, I went way high on this one. It's actually the 11,950 foot view, but excuse the numbers over to the right, but that's all my chicken scratch stuff. But anyway, the buckets to focus on in the general fund is you really have to separate out your general fund monies, because you have your restricted funding, which maybe you spend some of that this year, and maybe you don't, and you carry it over. But you shouldn't just conglomerate it all into the same pot, because then what you're doing is you're not sure how much your recurring costs, your year-over-year costs are for operating the business. You have to make sure you separate those out, okay? So that is the second and third option here, the unrestricted capital improvements and the recurring operations that we've got here, okay? And so the goal, as you know, what our Ryan's goal was definitely was to make sure that our operations is fairly break even, okay? Which you could see that, yeah, we broke even our operations and we have a balanced budget on an operational level right now, okay? So that means that we're not looking at spending our fund balance for any salaries, things that are going to happen year over year. And we have our unrestricted capital improvements at a level right now. This is the level that we can afford to fund. And that's just like, well, an example of that would be like your road improvements or road repairs. That kind of thing is going to be in your capital costs, okay? There's a fourth bucket, however. okay? And this is this 200,000 here, and that's what I'm calling operations non-recurring. And what that is the, that would be the master plan. So that's something that, gee, it's not really, it's an operational item, it's not capital, but it's not something that's gonna continue year over year. So it's something that you could potentially use fund balance for, okay? And because, like I said, for 2018, it looks at this point that we may have 300,000 in additional fund balance, unrestricted fund balance, that it looks like we might be able to take a little bit of that funding to be able to help offset and pay for that for this one time, okay? So that does mean overall that you would be operating at a little bit of a deficit for that, but it's a one-time and you know of it specifically. That's why I put it out there separately. But the interesting thing is, okay, I'm gonna note a couple things on here too. On this restricted funding, and this is not any different than last year, it's actually less. Your change in fund balance is negative 3.7 million because you have to include that gosh darn $1.65 million line of credit in there. So it looks like your deficit spending to the wazoo, okay, which stinks. But it's better to note it that way so that everybody's aware of it than to try to, you know, kind of throw it in there in the mix somewhere so people don't quite understand it. Okay, but we do show that as restricted funding, although that particular restricted funding source or restricted funding does not have a revenue source attached to it. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, okay?
Why does it look like we're, even without that, we're spending massively in deficit out of that restricted fund?
It's because a lot of that is because of the post funding. And we're gonna go into the capital improvements, but it is in our next conversation on capital improvements because there's 1.6 million that's being carried over in post approximately. And so you look at that and then you add some RETA funding of that of about 600,000. That's 2.1 million. And you add to that 2.1 million, the 1,650,000, and you get to that gargantuan number. And that's why it's really important to split that information out because without that, you would think, gosh, you know, what the heck? You know, we're deficit spending. This isn't prudent for us to do as a council.
Christy, did I just hear you say that you've got in this 3.7 million, both
Yes.
revenue and debt? Are you saying that the post income is packaged up together with our debt to get that number?
It's a total lump sum net number of all of your restricted funding revenues for restricted funding less expenditures. But you have to, in your restricted funding, also include that amount for the line of credit, which makes it confusing, a little confusing.
All right.
And the line of credit is for the underpass?
What's that?
Well, the line of credit is
No, that is
affordable
housing. And so in this presentation, this is our first draft budget, mind you, and I understand that council's gonna have to have a lot of conversation on where we actually land. But this would assume that we're paying off the Basalt underpass,
Okay.
this particular version of the budget, okay? And that's why it wouldn't be included in here. But if, it's a really good important point to note, because our last year's budget showed a $5 million deficit because it included that Basalt underpass in there, and that was why, okay? So if you look at the percentage of it, expenditures by the buckets is what I call it, roughly half of that is operations, and roughly the other half is your restricted funding. So it's pretty interesting that really that's such a huge part of what you guys really do. Some of the restricted funding, like I said, that 1.65 million is a little bit of a misnomer, but still, that's a huge part of the operations of this organization.
Just a flag for the future. Seems to me we should sell some of that affordable housing and zero out the line of credit if possible. Don't we all agree?
I think that's something we definitely need to talk about.
All right.
It's something, yeah, I mean, because we're paying interest on it, the interest is going up, but it's something that you guys, yeah, I mean, that's the into the future conversations that this will spur. So anyway, and then you spend about 6.1% of your funding on your capital improvements, so, and just so you know about that. All right, any questions on that? Yeah.
Christine, I had this conversation many, many times with
Yeah.
Judy and with Ryan, but understanding, of course, that this is how you need to present to the auditors and to others who will scrutinize, it would be helpful to be able to compare apples with apples. Compare all of the unrestricted to the unrestricted, all of the restricted to the restricted. So if we can restate for our consumption purposes, only the unrestricted with the unrestricted, that would give us a good idea of what our recurrent sources of funds are, namely sales tax, other taxes, permits, licenses, fees, and so on, and the ways that we spend those monies on unrestricted uses.
Yes.
And then we can make determinations about how much we want to pay down on principal and interest on a given security or not, how much we may or may not need to liquidate our real estate holdings or other.
But wait, there's more.
I know. That's why I'm getting in early.
And so that's awesome, because I think, I totally agree with you. And I think that Ryan and I have worked very hard, and Susan and a lot of the other staff, in really separating out our restricted funding. So it's not all lumped in some of the same accounts. And you're gonna see that, and I'm very color coordinated, not like, like my outfits are not color coordinated, but really my budgets are. So you'll see like anything in orange is gonna be denoted as restricted. And then I have a box on there that's gonna say, okay, this is your total restricted revenue, this is your total unrestricted revenue. This is your total restricted expense, total your unrestricted expense. And it's gonna note via color exactly what those are. And then that's gonna be the prelude to the conversations that you guys could have later on the actual carryover balances and some of the bigger spreadsheets on all of our restricted balances that Susan and I have spent quite some time looking and researching through to try to get a handle on those. And we're really, really there. But that's a little bit too minutia for this conversation at 11,950 feet. But we would concur.
Okay.
Just so you kind of have a little prelude of what we're thinking as well.
Because understanding the accounting, it still creates the illusion that we are deficit spending, which I know we are not, but nonetheless.
And that's a really good conversation too for a finance committee, is the presentation of it, is how we really make that clear in the presentation. Because we have a lot of autonomy in that presentation.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds
All
like
right.
we have some other minutia for later.
Yes, we do. So stay tuned. So, any other questions on that page? Okay. So go to page 5. I will note a couple things on here. I do put the change in fund balance on the bottom of that page, just so you guys are aware of the pluses and minuses on how much you're spending in total on your of your fund balance. But then what I do is in the box below, I do some informational work on how much is restricted and unrestricted in revenues and expenditures, so you can see exactly how that plays out by each one of the fiscal years, okay?
And that's where I was looking, because if you look at unrestricted revenues in, say, 2018, we have revenues of 6.9, unrestricted expense of 7.4. That's where I say, uh-oh.
Unrestricted, wait, okay, so
Right.
then you have unrestricted, now, where are you looking, 6.9 and 7.4?
In the
Oh, yeah.
box that's below.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, okay, what are the contra account revenues? We need to look at that.
That is a great question. So you'll note, in the contra account revenue is the second line in the box below. And you'll note the budget for 2018 was 604,006. And that's why I wanted to kind of note this out. This is an unrestricted revenue source, okay? So you can add that together with your other unrestricted. But I've had a change of accounting, so to speak. We used to take some of the post monies and allocate it via a revenue increase and an expenditure increase, which seemed to be double counting both our revenue and expenditure. And so we do that by now decreasing the revenue in one, or decreasing, the expenditure in the one account and moving it to another account to correctly reflect it in the right account, so it's not double counting anything. But in this contra revenue account item, that's why it went down from 604 to 225, is because of that change in accounting. So the 225,910 is only reflective of what the water fund contributes to our general fund for administrative costs right now, okay? And so, and the reason why I separated that out, because if you look over to the top right of the page in the 2019 plus or minus 2018 budget, and you look at your total revenues that went down 65,000, you'd be like, well, why is it going down when we're increasing in our sales tax? Well, it's because of this change in accounting of 375,000 you have to add back in there, okay? That's why I noted that separately, okay? So it's a little bit of a misnomer, but overall, it doesn't impact the bottom line of the financials, but I think it's gonna be clearer moving into the future, okay? So, so you look, and I'm actually gonna go into the next couple of pages because, you know, I like color. So, go to page 6 and 7, okay?
Jackie, it's just what you asked for.
I know, it is exactly what I
Graphs.
like.
Oh,
And
wow.
pie.
Okay.
Especially a graph in the
pictures
shape
of
of pie.
Oh, I love pies. Those are my favorite graphs. I don't know why. I don't know. But if you go, so James, yeah, oh, she's got it up. So there, we got our general fund revenues. So if you look, I mean, a picture's worth 1,000 words is what they say. It's so true. So our revenue of $10,056,000, really 3/4 of that, gosh darn thing, is our property and our sales tax revenues. I mean, really, we get a little over 900,000 in property tax and a heck of a lot of sales tax. I mean, is our budget, that's our bread and butter of our budget. And the remainder of our budget's licensing and permits, is our building permits and those kind of things, is our second largest pie piece. And then we get into the smaller things about fines and charges for services, which are still also very important. I don't want to take and say any of this is not important, because really we have a balanced budget. So without any piece of this, then you're operating in a deficit, okay? So it's all important, but just looking at it from a kind of a pie basis, really it does show you exactly where we get our revenue from and the most important pieces of that we need to be focused in on, okay? So then the expenditures by department is similar. So that's also on table GF. It's towards the bottom. It's in the tables GF tab. Left. Yeah, except for not that, but yeah, right above it, yeah. And then you go down, and then it'll be there. There you go. Yeah, there it is. Okay. For so this is you know, reflective of all of the different departments we have in the organization. You see the big pie that's 1/4 of this is really the post. And because we're spending potentially with this budget iteration, I'm not saying this is going to be the final version, but we're spending some monies that we've had in the past years that we've accumulated, plus also 1.8 million potentially in additional sales tax revenue. So that's a big chunk of change on that one. Actually our largest pie piece. And then you look at the second largest being Public Works at 2,615,000 in the darker blue, and then in the lighter blue is 2,176,000 for police. And then you have the other little pie towards the bottom, the 1,650,000 that we still have to restrict for our Tabor conversation. And then we have you know, finance and admin is 1.3 million, and some of the other smaller pie pieces there too. But they're all included there. So it gives you a good depiction of where you're spending your money as far as services provided to our community, okay? So I love the beady-eyed and recreationally challenged part of the conversation in the document. However, I am staying at 11,950 foot view for right now. So what I'm gonna tell you is that you see a lot of orange on this thing. And orange is always going to depict our restricted funding, as I was pointing out to Bill earlier, is that it is noted in the color of all the documents in the detail, okay, exactly of how we're restricting that. And we're going to get even more detailed as we move forward, but for now, this just shows us where we're at. So anytime it is in orange, those are our restricted funds, and we have quite a few of them to keep track of. And that's why it took us quite a long time to make sure we were getting all those accurate. Another thing I'm gonna note on page 8, okay? Two things, is our general sales tax, we've assumed a 3.5% increase, over this year, which we're trending a little higher than that, but I think that that's conservative. It's 3.5% over the 2018 projection. So we're still anticipating we're gonna get more, and when I was looking at other municipalities in the CML, that was right in the range, of our local municipalities and what others were anticipating, also. The other thing, under licenses and permits, our building permits, which is what, six down from the top of licensing and permits. So you'll note that, our budget for 2018 was 400,000. We reduced it to 300,000. Those revenues, because I don't like to play the real estate market when it comes to, municipal budgeting, it just requires too much, nail biting. And so I'd rather have that a little lower. And so we did some work around that to try to balance our budget and still get that number a little bit down a little bit more.
Is this page available up there?
Yes, the GF revenue.
I mean, it's gotta be so boring to be sitting there and then not be able to see it at all.
Okay.
Thanks.
So there we go. And so then we could go, so building permits under note A. And that's what I said in note A, is that we were trying to reduce that. Now, the great thing about putting ourselves in that strategic place with our building permits is that then at the end of the year, if we do get some building permits in, we can look at our capital improvements and we can look at those one-time costs to be able to utilize that funding. Because we have some deferred maintenance, as you guys are gonna see, okay? But then it allows us to be, just know we have the funding before we count on it, so to speak.
I like that, that's awesome.
Okay.
I do that at home too.
Oh,
I hide money from myself.
okay. So that's just weaning ourselves off of that a little bit. And let's see if there's anything else I want to note in the moment.
Property tax, that collection was down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Page 8 on the way top, on the top of the page. You note on the 2019 budget is that I did not budget as much as we received in 2018 because we had, if you look in 2017 actual, we had a little bit of a blip in our collection rates for property tax. 737,000. We were actually supposed to get closer to 900 that year, and because it was at a 90% collection rate in our counties, we had to actually supplement our bond fund because we didn't get enough in to pay our bonds back, and so we believe we're in a better position this year where we're going to get reimbursed that monies, but we're not sure exactly when. So we're hopeful of that, but I want to hedge my bets a little bit until I figure out why that happened.
Is that because the county or the state didn't give us money that was owed to us?
No, and actually, it's more the fact that maybe people didn't pay some of their property taxes, and I'm not sure quite why.
Well,
Yeah.
ultimately, it gets paid.
Ultimately,
It goes
it
to a
does.
tax sale or what have you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, but it's something I am still researching. So that's why I hedge my bets a little bit on that, but we can be hopeful we get more in and, we can look at our deferred maintenance and see what we need to do in the future, whatever else you guys decide and dream big about, whatever it is. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. I think that's it on revenues. Now, I'm not gonna go into the line-by-line budgets, but I do have them all here. Because this is the 11,950-foot view, we want to ski down, have fun, don't want to get into those details yet. But that information is coming, and I'm sure you guys are going to be able to look through that and offer some good questions up for us for future meetings. Okay?
And Madam Mayor,
Yes.
if I may, the idea tonight was to do just as Christie did, which was really present that higher view. It's our intent, as you can see reflected on the budget calendar, that we would give you guys a chance to study this, go over it a bit. We're going to bring it back to the Finance Committee in a couple weeks. It's our intent the week after that, I think we looked at, we'll reach out to you in an email, but we'd like to get you all in one-on-one, sort of like we did last year, just to be able to go through on some of those line items and really kind of spend that time. And then we'll come back and have, another work session with council. I think there's going to be, certainly some discussion on the discretionary funding, as there usually is. And so that's sort of how we've planned it out. We wanted to kind of introduce it tonight, give you guys a chance to kind of grasp some of the bigger concepts, and then we give you some homework to do. And then in the interim, before that next finance committee meeting, we're happy to answer questions or just start writing them down, and we will look forward to visiting with you guys. And not to say you can't ask questions now, but that was sort of the intent.
Well, I would hope that the Finance Committee could, with your help and Christie's help, come up with the English questions of things like what Auden was suggesting, of which Pitkin County houses should we sell right now to pay down some of this debt, and how else do we move? I mean, I hope those questions are put in verbiage so all of us can understand it, so
Sure.
the public can understand it.
And just so you know, as it relates to that, we sort of see that as a bit separate. We kind of have to forge ahead with our budget, but we've developed, thank you to Christy and Matt from Public Works, basically a pro forma on how that asset, how that group of assets is working. And so we want to present that to you all as well and make some recommendations ultimately. So it's okay if the budget reflects as it does for now, and then we can make some decisions moving forward on that, because you can always, this can be changed even after it's adopted, if need be, so.
And will there be time to get the information and questions together for the Finance Committee before it comes to the next full council meeting, so that they can?
We think so, yes, because we would have it, if that calendar, I think it was the 24th of October is the Finance Committee meeting, and then the 13th of November would be that budget work session. And then we would think that in between those two dates is sort of what we're aiming now, that we would try to get you all one-on-one, and we'll just kind of go through it, to whatever extent you all would like.
I request on the budget calendar to include when the council discretionary grant applications are due.
Sure, I'll be happy to add that.
Great, thank you.
I just want to thank you, Christy, for identifying the sums that are going to flow into the variety of RETAs. I think that's the first time we've seen that. So it's nice to be able to see how much we can anticipate, and then to look at those funds balances and see how they will be appropriated. So that's really good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so if the intent was to keep this portion at the height of Sopris, is that what you were saying, or
Yes.
lower, higher? I don't know.
11,950.
Okay, whatever. But we do want to still talk about CIP
Yes,
as it
that's
relates to, okay, good.
Yes. And, and I wasn't planning to go through the other funds, except for to note, just review them. The water fund is now a break-even fund, even including some capital purchases in it. So I think that fund is doing very well, thanks to the fees and things that have now made it sustainable, so to speak. I think that's working very well. And the bond fund, we've already talked about it. You just want to make sure you can pay your debt where there. Conservation Trust, we know that's there, available for parks, so.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good job, thank you.
Is a standing ovation out of line?
Yeah, maybe so much, yeah, no.
We'll hit you at the end.
Yeah, that'd be
All right.
great.
All right.
I'm excited, everybody was awake, everybody was engaged, I just love it.
We all
Numbers
have
are
those like
fun,
frog eye things, those frog eyes that like they're clear. Just kidding, we're good.
Yeah.
It was good. So, is it you?
Capital improvements plan now. Christy's gonna kick it off, and we'll,
Start that. And everybody stayed for the budget. I feel so honored, you guys.
Thank you, audience. Yay!
This is the final. Earlier today, it was the final.
Thanks for, going
Sure.
I think he said
she's
you can't
gonna
leave
pass
till
it
there's a
out.
break.
Hey, Christy, were you gonna hand that out?
Okay, so are we ready to start for the next? Okay, you guys are awesome. I love the energy in this room for budgeting. Fantastic.
Numbers are important.
Yeah, I agree. Safety in numbers is what I say. Maybe we could, call it the safety department number 2. So the first page here, what we have is our capital improvement plan for 5 years. It is subject to change. This is something that always ebbs and flows, definitely throughout our whole budget process, until it's finalized, and also then into the next 4 years. I mean, it really is dependent upon how much in resources we have available for those years. But these are the hopes, and it really gives you a sense for how much you're deferring maintenance on your buildings is a really good part of your capital plan. The things that are up and coming, and really the direction, looking at a direction for the future. Looking for that 11,950 foot view of where you guys want to head as a town. And that's really the important and critical part of your capital improvement plan. The one thing that we were able to accomplish as of today with these 2 budgets that we've been preparing is that we were able to fully also pull out all of our capital projects and tie back our budget to our capital improvement plan so that we can match the 2 together and they work simultaneously, synergistically, okay? So it seems to make more sense, and then it really helps us on reconciliation, explaining things to people when things match. So I just like it when everything is on the same basis. So I have some accounts that now are gonna just be only for capital projects, okay? So we've got a lot of different parts of our capital improvement plan. The first thing I wanna note is that we added, with Boyd's help, thank you, Boyd, and Matt, the town facilities budget is, this is our way of trying to start to attempt to see what we need to do for our town facilities and looking at deferred maintenance for like our town hall here and all these kind of facilities. We just need to make sure that those are visible in our budgeting process, and now they are. And so that's really one thing that was added this year that was really, I think, a great addition. And making sure that we continue to look at those things strategically and also from a deferred maintenance standpoint, okay? So then the next part is that, I mean, you guys have seen a lot of this, I think, from the past history of things, is the top 2 are the police fleet. We've got 9 vehicles on our police fleet. We are behind in maintaining those and getting those updated, so we need to start getting on that rotation of 3 each year for the next 3 years, and then a portable radar trailer for the 2020 year, hopefully. And then public works fleets, we'll go through that. There's some stuff in there that I'll explain. The town facilities, I just talked about a little bit. Streets, partially restricted funding. There's some unrestricted funding in there. We'll go through that. And then water, of course, we put in blue to denote water. So that, and I put everything on the water fund in blue, and that was really based upon some of the other conversations we've had in the past, is just to make sure that people understand that comes from a separate funding source. So we're trying to keep our water fund so that it's self-sustaining. It's more operating like a business, so to speak, okay? Then we have our BPAC art installation. with restricted funding. And finally, last but definitely not least, is our parks, open space, and trails funding, okay? So then you get to your yearly capital expenditures. For 2019, it's quite hefty at $5,108,000, but there's a lot of restricted catch-up we're doing for this year, especially within the post account, you'll note on that, because $4 million of that, $4,082,000, is really, is restricted funding. And then what we try to do each year is look at how much we have available from our general and water fund. And so this year we had $856,000 approximately available from our general fund for unrestricted capital purchases. And that's another very important number, okay? And then $175,000 available for water, okay? And then I put in big yellow over to the right is there's some need to change the 2020 to 2023 based upon budget constraints. Each year is a different year, but this is what, if we had all the money in the world, we would sure hope to do these things, okay? Any questions on our first page?
How do we get to that if we had all the money in the world part?
We're working.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Okay, that's a different conversation.
Yes. Good.
But,
Quick question. We can discuss some of the details, but some of them might be for public fora because they're of kind of a policy nature. So for instance, I noticed that art installation BPAC is funded every other year. You know, why funded every other year and not every year? That's one question. Then I guess to the extent that this represents a profit and loss projected expenditures, if we're expecting to expend 3.5 on parks, open space, and trails, what happens if you don't spend that amount? If we are not expending, would the difference simply be carried in a fund balance, I presume?
yeah, it would be carried over in a restricted fund balance. And it is, when we get to the post page, which is the last page, then you'll see that we actually do note the restricted carryover balances if everything went exactly according to budget. So that would just adjust those numbers. Okay? Okay, yeah, that's great. Okay, so you go to the next page, and we have some things that are just gonna need additional conversation. This is the dream big and look at, and to review, looking at our public works, building, looking at having to replace that, because that thing is getting a little worn. But it's gonna need an additional funding source and just more conversation. That's just one of the things to just kind of note as you're going through your conversation, budget conversations into the future. And some of these other items here too, are also there. So that is, I'm sorry, it's on this bottom of the 2019 summary. Sorry, James.
Sorry.
Yes, you're fine. I know, I'll try to get it into a different format for next time. Yeah, okay. So those are your other kind of funding sources, things that we have to still talk about, how we're gonna get to these items that are very important, so, okay? But they haven't been budgeted anywhere yet. All right,
Partially.
Yeah, there's some budget in 2019 for it.
oh, yeah, that would be, and I apologize, that's a good point. We have not budgeted any of these items. Well, the 10,000.
By way of example, the green efficiency, 55,000 was included, but
Yeah.
the reason for the note was just an overall, climate action plan directive that every year we should look at spending $100,000 a year, just to get that in front of everyone.
Yeah, so but I'll have to put a footnote or something, because I understand that confusion, so, for sure. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, something too, like Midland Streetscape upgrade, deferring that for the next 4 years effectively. Also, I wonder if we don't want to advance some of that, since it seems to be kind of what I'm hearing from many of the Midland shop owners. Appreciate beautification, a plant or something to kind of enhance the feel of our downtown corridor.
Yeah.
So, and I realize you said that these are not reflected on the prior page, but.
Right. Right, I know, and that's where the other conversation and the you know, those priorities for council and your direction and your, you know, strategic vision will help.
And I think
And I
it's,
worry about getting too much in the weeds from 2020 on is tough, because we,
You don't
you
know.
know, we don't know.
But the question would be, why aren't we spending this in 2019? Don't we want to include a line item to enhance the vibrancy and vitality of the downtown corridor sooner rather than later?
Ryan, were you trying to speak?
yeah, well, yeah, I was just gonna comment on that a little bit is, you know, we've definitely heard of trying to upgrade streetscape, from staff even, looking at the sidewalks, looking at some of the planters and some upgrades we know could happen. $2 million is a hefty sum, obviously, that at this moment in time would either come some sources of restricted, but not all of our restricted funds allow for expenditure in there, post being one of those. And then the other point of it is, you know, we don't know what that looks like yet, so we've got to do some planning to figure out. That's very specific planning and engineering and stuff, so that takes a little bit of time.
Where I would go with that.
Yeah. And then, you know, it's also possible to try to seek some grants and things to help leverage that. But all of that obviously plays into taking a little bit of time. And then I think we need to ask council, you know, what are the priorities as far as what would you do first? You know, a lot of obviously the public workshop is something that we've been talking about, is that's sort of the source where all of our services get delivered from. It is possible to borrow money, issue certificates of participation is one strategy that you can do. But, you know, I guess just to give you a little feedback, that was kind of where we were coming from.
And I guess I raise it because if our strategy includes economic development as one of the strategic objectives, then we need to budget for that strategic objective. And so that's where this is actually pretty important to know where our strategy stands, because deferring it to 2022 might be inconsistent with our strategy. It's certainly inconsistent with my perspective based upon what I hear from business. So,
Well, to kind of get out of the specifics, but back into the up here, it does look like we should be starting with the strategic plan and then the budget and the CIP, or some rational connection to the strategy that we worked on.
Correct, yes.
So, I mean,
Agreed.
it seems like that's where we should start in the budget discussion instead of,
In a perfect world, that is correct, but your strategy's not complete yet.
to do it.
But you guys do at least know what those four main topics were on that.
and maybe we could at least circle that back in the conversation, whether it's complete
Oh,
or
you guys will
not.
have it before the next time we all
Okay.
meet,
Okay,
for sure, yeah.
because that's a good point.
Yeah, the stars are starting to align
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
your strategic plan and your capital improvements. It's got to be exciting from your perspective.
I
would
know,
be
it's
excited.
hard
There's
to
a lot of heavy lifting
It's
that's
hard to tell
gone
if you're
into
starting from the
producing,
bottom or the
getting
middle
all
or
these
the
together,
top.
so
or
it'll be
what.
nice to finally have
Right.
those in your hands so that you guys can make those references.
Okay, Chrissy.
Okay, all right. So then we can go into the page 3, Public Works, fleet replacement. And so that would be,
That is what it is.
So what we were looking at, we need a street sweeper, and so we were gonna do a lease of that street sweeper for this 2019, and then we have some other needs that into the future that you can note there.
Just a quick question on the lease. Have you done, I assume that you've done the cost analysis of lease versus
Purchase? Yes.
Okay,
Mhm.
great.
Yeah, and the
Thanks for
reality, yeah, sure, no, we looked into that, and we've had really good luck with doing leases on equipment, like our backhoe and our skid steer, and we get it at a nice low rate. And then it also sort of amortizes that out over time, and in fact, allows us to replace that equipment on a good cycle too, so we always have good newer equipment.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Boy, do we really need to buy you a $360,000 dump truck? And is a hook truck even a thing, or is it some deal?
Ignore him.
Truck
I asked the same questions, believe me.
Did he answer it?
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
I'm sorry, were you sleeping back there?
Okay, let's keep going, let's keep going.
Yeah,
We can
so-
give, we
We'll
can
talk
give
later.
Boyd trouble later. That's in a coming meeting.
So the next part of the plan is your facilities plan. That's just the start of looking at just the basic needs of each facility. I'm not gonna go into each individual need, but we have some basics that we're gonna need to budget for this year. For sure, the public works, we need some patchwork we need to, do to make sure that the roof still doesn't leak and that kind of stuff. Just to keep the building functional. Swimming pool it's got some cracks in the swimming pool that need to be fixed and repaired. So that's what that looks like. And then, there's an Emma bridge in there, and some microphones for council meetings on the next page. And then, some, RETA signs, through the RETA grant, restricted, that we would be doing. And then, on the page 6 is, green efficiencies, 55,000, through the energy and rent funding. So that would be where that would come from, okay? Looking at streets, as I said earlier, page 7 starts, we've got some restricted and partially restricted funding for streets, and then also just through our unrestricted is all the white in that too. For streets maintenance, the Cottonwood sidewalk, 2 Rivers Road in there is restricted. Willits Lane's restricted, and so is Willits traffic calming be restricted, and then there's some other, more minor, repairs and, updates, for that we can go through in more detail.
Yeah, when you do, I mean, I would love to know more of the 2020 expenditures, like, because if you have 350,000 for 2 Rivers Road, just a little more explanation of what those pieces are. I mean, it could be part of your whole streets plan, but a little more information on that.
Are you referring to the 161,000?
No. I'm
Oh,
looking at
this
2
one
Rivers
here.
Road. When you start looking in the future, you see pretty large expenditures there. It just would be great to know. A lot of the other ones up to this had kind of a little comment piece of what it's for.
Sure.
And so this doesn't have that, so it'd just be good to know.
And Susan just made the comment, so that some of those improvements are basically out here in front, associated with the CDC.
You don't
and
have
the
to tell me
park.
now. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just, as we go forward, it would be great to know.
And all these have a separate sheet that describes the
Okay.
project.
Yeah,
Improvements.
they all have like more
Well,
comments on
not
it.
every one of them, but the ones that were kind of the big ticket ones, like the streets, like 350,000 for 2 Rivers Road, those all have a separate sheet.
Because that was a great addition that we talked about, was adding some English, so you knew what it was for. Jen?
And as well, for example, on those follow-up sheets, like Cottonwood sidewalk, to include how much we have spent to date, because I know that we have put a lot into engineering on that.
It's an engineered shovel-ready project, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I always assumed that that was part of the 240,000, but to see 240,000 into 2019,
Yeah.
oh, that's a really expensive project.
It's an expensive project,
Yeah.
but I think it does check some boxes for us with regard to pedestrian connectivity and safety. You know, it is
Right,
on the
safe routes
street
to
where the
schools.
school
Yeah.
exists. So it's a good one, particularly, you know, we also have an easement secured along there that sort of time is of the essence with that one. So getting that one done, I think, would be pretty good. And as you guys will see, would complement the strategy.
So we are going to go more into these later, so maybe we should keep moving instead of stopping on line items.
Yep. So then, so water fund, that's just on a separate page. We'll go through that in detail later. And then the last but not least is the post conversation. And you'll note at the top, we have the estimated beginning carryover balances, and at the bottom, there's the ending estimated carryover that goes into the next fiscal year. This does assume that we're gonna pay off, the underpass, but I know that all of this is still up for conversation. You know, it helps, to maintain an unrestricted balance on the remainder of our funding, because the challenge with that is that until that's paid off, we still have to keep that 650,000 available. So it's a tough one.
I have a question for whoever, based on something that Auden brought up that I've asked before, and I probably just can't remember. But if we sell housing, do we have to reinvest that money into same? It goes into the general fund?
Well, if we sold it, you know, I think the idea would be to try to pay down that debt that we have.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, is it restricted that we have to do?
It's not.
Back to that, or, okay.
Right, because we've overspent by that 1,950,000 that I noted earlier in the presentation. So we have some flexibility.
Right. Yeah.
This, paying down the underpass debt, I love it. Good fiscal prudence. Thank you, Finance Committee, Ryan, Christie. And then, the one weird thing is this, Basalt River Park purchase, holding that there. I mean, we may well choose to buy that chunk if there's a development proposal. But I don't even know where that number came from, or how we arrived at it, and why we'd hold that in there. It's something that we may or may not do. Shouldn't that not be there, and we have reserves, and we use that money for reserves?
Well, so basically how we have been operating from a staff level is going off of current policy. So our master plan, using that as guidance, that some portion over to the CDC property would be purchased. The number is not a final number. It's a starting number. It's a budgeted number. Obviously, the negotiations haven't been had with the owner of the property. From our standpoint, we wanted to put it in there with the assumption that since we have an application in, the opportunity would arise theoretically in 2019, and so it's just coming to fruition from what the policies that were adopted. So that, as I've told a number of you, is up to this council as to what you would like to do with that number. But the guidance that we've had thus far told us to get ready for that purchase in 2019. So.
And if I recall, the number came from this 1.6 million, came from a previous town manager, and it came at the direction of council stating of the 3.02 acres, we're interested in buying half of it, with the RFCDC listing prices for the entirety of the parcel, then divided into square feet, and then calculated out from there, and it comes to 1.6 for half of the parcel.
Right. So anything else on the high level?
On the high level, no.
Again, at that level, one of the questions that comes to mind, I guess, Auden, thanks for bringing it up, is if we are, identifying that 1.6 million for a purchase that may or may never occur, what aren't we funding this year? Such as the $2 million that's pushed off to 2022 for Midland Avenue improvement, or the sporadic funding of BPAC, or if our strategy calls for investment in climate action, why are we only investing $100,000? If we want to be, I'm sorry?
Those are different funds.
I know, this is post funds, but there is a $600,000 rededication of some funds from somewhere as well.
Oh.
So it's like,
From ARETA, yeah.
Again, if we're setting all of this money up, we're not doing other stuff. And the other stuff is actually very central to our strategy.
I think what they have said, though, is this was assumptions that staff brought in, and that we have not even begun to have a discussion about it,
Right.
and we certainly will.
But that's why I'm raising them now, because they are policy issues. And if the strategy emerges and we have infrastructure, climate action, economic development, help me on the fourth.
There may be more.
before citizen engagement. I hope not, because then strategies just get too
I'm just
cumbersome.
saying,
If you have-
that's not for tonight, though, so.
But that's where strategies drive budgets, and you budget against strategies, and in the absence of a strategy, frankly, we end up spending to repair roads and replace fleets, but we're not investing in the vision of our community. And
I'm counting on these guys make the big bucks to bring that kind of conversation back to us, because we have to have that conversation.
Well,
Jen?
that's the question.
Jennifer?
that's being asked.
So that's, I'm partially on board with Bill that I love having a future agenda and a calendar, a budget calendar, and I'd like to see a CIP calendar or something of the sorts that speaks out when council is going to have input on, for example, post, or when we are going to deep dive into some of these items, because they are, I recognize that staff has been so effective in the past 2.5 years. Y'all, this is leaps and bounds amazing from what we originally had 2.5 years ago. And so kudos. And now we're still excited and have that, ooh, and then we can do this. And I think that's what it is that excitement of, ooh, when do we, oh, we're doing this. This is getting done. When do we get to keep going and deep dive into more of these things?
Yeah, and the other
Sure,
thing
we
that
can do
is, that you alluded to, and we have seen it in the past, 100 years ago, which is, these are the monies we have to spend. The toilet's broken, we have to change it. I mean, these are the ones we have to spend, which kind of helps us, and I don't know how you delineate that, so that it's clear to us. But I remember dealing with budgets at some board where that was super helpful to say, you got no say, really, unless you want to say, we're not going to have a toilet there anymore.
Yeah.
So that's super helpful too, so. So I'm hoping the rest of this conversation, we can bite off in chunks and not try to do it all.
Yeah, we'll have to come back and spend some time, it sounds like, on the capital improvements plan and devote, so that we can get some guidance as far as how we might manipulate it. I mean, Bill, you mentioned the roads. I mean, we have an investment in the roads. We need to keep those
No,
roads
I
to a
get it.
certain level of service because it saves us money in the long run. So that's a good thing. We actually did cut in our sharpening of the pencil, we cut some money out of them this year so that we can make sure we're able to do some other things. So really it's sort of that levers analogy I used last year, where if you have a set of levers and you pull on one, it's going to affect the other. And at this point in time, I think we've delivered to you all based on adopted policy and our take of what maintenance requires us to do in a prudent maintenance program that this reflects that, with the full knowledge that you guys are all going to want to make sure that you understand it, and then maybe give us some direction to mess with some of those levers. But we're prepared for that. So
Thank you, guys. This was, like Jen said, way, way better than what we've had sometimes, so.
Can I just
Anyway.
have one comment again at this 50,000-foot level? In terms of how we move forward, and if we are going to budget against strategy, and if we are ultimately going to budget against master plan, we won't discuss the individual line items now, but at some point, when we start diving deeply into the line items, we will want to have money budgeted for the preparation of a master plan, for the recruitment of these urban planners who are going to solve all of our problems. And Ryan, as you and I discussed, again, I think we do want to look at our staffing plan. And the LTEs that we have, we need to ask whether this is enough to do the job. When you presented our metrics, the metrics of our staffing efficiency, on the one hand, it says we are massively efficient, and it also says we're probably overworked. So, if there is a need that you perceive to add staff, now would be the time to budget for it. And the people that come to mind are people that might deal with general administrative functions to permit you more time to deal with strategy or communications, so that you are not saddled with that. We have someone who can proactively carry our image and identity and the messages forward. And because of the way the budget's prepared, it's totally great, logical, but when we separate general fund into legislative, administrative, it's hard to see who's going where and whether, what the aggregate is. But that is something that I would encourage from the perspective of strategy. Let's make sure that we have all the staff that we need to do the job that we want to position us for the future.
Got it? Did you get it?
I think
You
so.
want to hear it once more?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, we're good. Thank you.
As far as I'm concerned, this meeting's adjourned. Unless there's further business.
I have things to hand out, all of you.
Things to hand us?